The horses were 30 seconds away from trampling every man, woman, and child in Cedar Gulch when Marcus Thornfield walked into the middle of Main Street. What happened next defied everything the townspeople thought they knew about nature, animals, and the man they trusted with their lives. But to understand how Marcus Thornfield became the most feared and revered man in Colorado Territory, we need to go back to where it all started. Back to a night in 1873 when a desperate father made a deal that would curse his bloodline for generations. Marcus hadn't always been able to speak to horses. In fact, for the first 27 years of his life, he'd been about as ordinary as a man could be in the American West. He worked as a ranch hand on the Double Bar T, earned honest wages, and dreamed of saving enough money to buy his own spread and marry Ellen Crawford, the schoolteacher who'd stolen his heart with her laugh and her way of making even the roughest cowboys mind their manners. Then came the night that changed everything. October 15th, 1873. Marcus was riding the boundary fence when he heard the screaming. Not human screaming, something else entirely. Something that made his horse rear and nearly throw him from the saddle. The sound was coming from Dead Horse Canyon, a place locals avoided after dark for reasons nobody liked to discuss. Marcus should have turned around and ridden back to the ranch. Should have told himself it was just coyotes or the wind playing tricks through the rock formations. But that screaming didn't sound like any animal he'd ever heard. It sounded like pain beyond description, like something was being tortured in ways that violated the natural order of things. He found the source of the sounds in a clearing deep in the canyon. An ancient Apache man, older than anyone Marcus had ever seen, was tending to a horse that had been mauled by something with claws longer than a man's fingers. The animal was dying slowly, its breathing shallow and labored, its eyes rolling with terror and agony. The old Apache looked up when Marcus approached, and his eyes held depths that seemed to stretch back through centuries of knowledge and sorrow. He spoke in accented English, his voice carrying the weight of prophecy. "This horse belonged to my grandson," the old man said, his weathered hands never stopping their gentle ministrations. "He was murdered 3 days ago by men who wanted his land. Shot down like a dog while this mare watched. She has been searching for him ever since, calling his name in the language that horses used to mourn their dead." Marcus dismounted slowly, understanding that he was witnessing something sacred and terrible. The dying mare's eyes met his, and in that moment, he felt something shift in his chest, a connection that went beyond the physical world, deeper than anything he'd ever experienced. "She is dying of grief as much as her wounds," the Apache continued. "In my tribe, we believe that when an animal dies in such sorrow, their spirit seeks someone to carry on their bond with the living world. Someone who can speak for them when they can no longer speak for themselves." The old man's hands moved in complex patterns over the dying horse, and Marcus heard him chanting in a language that seemed to make the very air around them vibrate with power. As the chant reached its crescendo, the mare's eyes locked on Marcus's one final time, and he felt something flow into him like electricity made of starlight and shadow. "What have you done?" Marcus whispered, but he already knew. He could feel it settling into his bones, changing him at a level deeper than flesh and blood. "I have given you the gift my people call Sunkmanito Tonkawin, the speaking with four-legged brothers," the Apache replied. "But gifts from the spirit world always come with a price. The horses will trust you, follow you, obey you. But every time you use this power, it will take something from those you love. The spirits must maintain balance." Marcus wanted to refuse, to demand that the old man take back whatever he'd done. But as he opened his mouth to protest, he heard them, not with his ears, but with something deeper. Every horse within miles, speaking to him in a language he'd never learned but somehow understood perfectly. They told him about their fears, their joys, their loyalty to the humans who cared for them. They shared memories of running free across endless plains, of the trust they placed in riders who treated them with kindness, of the terror they felt when violence erupted around them. It was beautiful and overwhelming and absolutely terrifying. The Apache man gathered his few possessions and prepared to leave. "Remember," he said as he mounted his own horse, "the spirits always collect their price. Use this gift wisely, or it will consume everything you hold dear." Marcus rode back to the ranch in a daze, his mind reeling with the voices of every horse between the canyon and the double-bar T. He tried to convince himself it had all been a dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and the strange atmosphere of Dead Horse Canyon. But when he walked into the stable the next morning, every horse turned toward him and spoke. Not in words, but in thoughts and emotions that flooded his consciousness like a dam breaking. They told him about their aches and pains, their preferences for different types of grain, their opinions about the various ranch hands who cared for them. Most importantly, they told him about their absolute trust in him, as if he'd been their friend and confidant for years rather than just another human who occasionally brought them hay. The first time Marcus used his gift publicly was 3 weeks later, when a wild stallion that had been terrorizing local ranches for months finally got cornered in a box canyon. The animal had killed 2 horses and injured several men who tried to capture or kill it. The local sheriff had organized a hunting party to put the beast down permanently. Marcus volunteered to try talking to the stallion before they resorted to violence. The other men laughed at him, but Sheriff Williams agreed to let him try, figuring it might provide some entertainment before they got down to the serious business of shooting. What happened next became legend in Cedar Gulch. Marcus walked into that canyon unarmed and alone, while the stallion paced and snorted and showed every sign of preparing to trample him into the dust. The watching men could see Marcus's lips moving, but they couldn't hear what he was saying. After 10 minutes of what looked like a one-sided conversation, the stallion's demeanor completely changed. The wild anger drained out of his posture, replaced by something that looked almost like relief. The animal walked over to Marcus and nuzzled his shoulder like a pet horse greeting its beloved owner. Marcus led the stallion out of the canyon and into a corral at the double-bar T, where the animal became as docile and trainable as any ranch horse. The men who witnessed it couldn't stop talking about what they'd seen. Word spread quickly through the territory about the man who could speak to horses in their own language. That should have been the end of it. Marcus had proven his gift, tamed a dangerous animal, and become something of a local celebrity. But the Apache's warning about the price began to manifest in ways that made Marcus's stomach turn with dread. Ellen Crawford, the schoolteacher he planned to marry, began having strange accidents. First, she fell down the schoolhouse steps and broke her arm. Then she got sick with a fever that lasted for weeks and left her weak and pale. Her father, who had been a strong supporter of their engagement, suddenly began expressing doubts about Marcus's suitability as a husband. Marcus tried to tell himself these were just coincidences, but deep in his heart, he knew better. Every time he used his gift with horses, something bad happened to Ellen or someone else he cared about. The balance the Apache had spoken of was being maintained by taking happiness and health from the people closest to him. The pattern became undeniable over the following months. Marcus would help a rancher with a difficult horse, and that evening Ellen would have another accident or illness. He would calm a frightened animal during a thunderstorm, and Ellen's father would suffer a setback in his business. He would prevent a runaway horse from injuring someone, and Ellen would lose another student as parents began to worry about the mysterious afflictions that seemed to follow her around. Marcus began refusing requests for help with horses, making excuses and avoiding situations where his gift might be needed. But the horses themselves began seeking him out, appearing at his cabin at all hours with problems they needed him to solve. They told him about abusive owners, dangerous conditions, and injuries that required his intervention. How could he ignore their pleas for help? The crisis came on a spring morning in 1875 when Marcus woke to find his entire world crashing down around him. Ellen had disappeared during the night, leaving behind only a note saying she couldn't marry a man whose very presence seemed to bring misfortune to everyone around him. Her father had lost his business to creditors and was planning to leave Cedar Gulch permanently. The Double Bar T had decided not to renew Marcus's employment, fearing that his reputation for strange occurrences was affecting their ability to hire other workers. In the space of 24 hours, Marcus had lost his job, his fiancée, and his place in the community, all because he'd tried to use his gift to help both horses and humans, not understanding that the spirits required payment in the form of human suffering. Marcus spent the next 2 years living as a hermit in the mountains, trying to escape both his gift and the pain it brought to others. He built a small cabin near a remote stream and attempted to live entirely off the land, avoiding contact with both horses and people. But isolation couldn't silence the voices in his head or change what he'd become. The horses found him anyway. Wild mustangs would appear at his cabin, injured or sick, or simply seeking the comfort of speaking with someone who understood their language. Marcus couldn't ignore their needs, even knowing that helping them would somehow cause suffering elsewhere. He was trapped between his compassion for the animals and his fear of the price that would be extracted from innocent people. The turning point came in the summer of 1877, when Marcus learned that Ellen Crawford had died of consumption in Denver, where she'd gone to live with her aunt after leaving Cedar Gulch. The news hit him like a physical blow, not just because of his love for her, but because he realized that running away hadn't protected her from the curse's influence. Distance hadn't broken the connection between his gift and the suffering of those he cared about. Marcus made a decision that would define the rest of his life. If he couldn't escape the price of his gift, he would learn to manage it. He would use his abilities only when absolutely necessary, and he would structure his life to minimize the number of people who could be affected by the spiritual balance that governed his power. He returned to Cedar Gulch a changed man. Gone was the friendly ranch hand who'd once dreamed of marriage and a normal life. In his place was someone harder, more distant, who kept his emotions carefully controlled and his relationships deliberately superficial. He established himself as a horse trainer and problem solver, helping with difficult animals when the need was great enough to justify the risk. The townspeople noticed the change in Marcus, but attributed it to grief over Ellen's departure and death. They welcomed him back because his skills with horses were genuinely valuable, and the strange accidents that had once plagued the community seemed to have stopped. What they didn't realize was that Marcus had learned to direct the price of his gift toward himself rather than toward others. Every time Marcus used his power to help a horse, he accepted physical or emotional pain as payment. Injuries that should have healed quickly became chronic problems. Illnesses lingered longer than they should have. Sleep became elusive, and peace of mind became impossible. But the people around him remained safe, and that was a trade Marcus was willing to make. For 3 years, this system worked. Marcus became known throughout the territory as a man who could handle any horse-related problem, no matter how dangerous or difficult. Ranchers would travel hundreds of miles to seek his help with animals that other trainers had given up on. His reputation grew to almost mythical proportions, but he remained a solitary figure who kept his distance from personal relationships. Then came the morning that would test everything Marcus had learned about managing his gift and its price. June 12, 1880. Marcus was working with a young stallion behind his cabin when he heard them, not with his ears, but with the supernatural sense that connected him to every horse within miles. 2,000 wild mustangs, moving as a single herd, thundering towards Cedar Gulch at full gallop. They were running from something that had spooked them badly enough to abandon their usual caution around human settlements. In their panic, they couldn't see that their path would take them directly through the center of town during the busiest part of the morning. Marcus's gift let him see through their eyes, feel their terror, and confusion. A wildfire, started by lightning during the night, had cut off their usual escape routes and driven them toward the only open ground available, the valley where Cedar Gulch sat like a collection of toys in the path of an avalanche. The herd would reach the town in less than 5 minutes. There was no time to warn anyone, no way to evacuate the streets, no method of turning aside 2,000 terrified animals except for one. Marcus would have to use his gift on a scale he'd never attempted before, knowing that the price for such a massive intervention would be beyond anything he'd ever paid. Marcus ran toward town, calculating distances and timing in his head. The horses would enter Main Street from the east, traveling at nearly 30 miles per hour. Their panic made them unpredictable, but their herd instinct made them follow the leaders. If he could stop the lead animals, the rest might follow suit. But the spiritual cost of controlling so many horses simultaneously might kill him or destroy his mind entirely. As he reached the edge of town, Marcus could see people going about their normal morning routines, completely unaware of the disaster bearing down on them. Children played in the street while their mothers hung laundry. Storekeepers swept their front steps and discussed the weather. The sheriff sat on his porch, reading a newspaper and enjoying his coffee. In 30 seconds, all of that peaceful normalcy would be transformed into chaos and death unless Marcus made the choice that would define the rest of his life. The ground began to shake as the herd approached. A few people looked up, puzzled by the strange vibration. Then someone spotted the dust cloud on the horizon and screamed. The word stampede raced through the town like wildfire, sending people scrambling for shelter or standing frozen in terror. Marcus walked into the middle of Main Street and positioned himself directly in the path of the approaching herd. He could feel the fear radiating from every person in town, could sense their confusion and desperation. But he could also feel the horses, 2,000 individual minds consumed by panic and the instinct to run from danger, unable to see that their flight would create an even greater tragedy. The lead stallion came into view, a magnificent bay with a white blaze down his face and eyes wide with terror. Behind him, the rest of the herd stretched back like a river of muscle and motion, powerful enough to reduce every building in Cedar Gulch to splinters and every person to broken bones and blood. Marcus reached out with his gift, trying to touch the mind of the lead stallion. The connection felt different this time, stronger, but also more dangerous. The horse's panic was so intense that it threatened to overwhelm Marcus's own consciousness. He could feel himself being pulled into the animal's terror, losing his sense of human identity in the flood of equine emotion. Fighting against the mental chaos, Marcus projected thoughts of calm and safety toward the lead horse. He showed the animal images of green grass and clear water, of peaceful meadows where the herd could rest without fear. Most importantly, he communicated his own certainty that the danger they were fleeing had passed, that there was no longer any need to run. The lead stallion's response was immediate and dramatic. The animal planted his feet and skidded to a stop so suddenly that Marcus could feel the displaced air as 2,000 pounds of horseflesh came to a halt just 20 feet away from where he stood. The rest of the herd, following their leader's example, began slowing their own charge. But controlling that many animals simultaneously was like trying to hold back a river with his bare hands. Marcus could feel his gift straining under the load, his connection to the horses becoming painful and unstable. Each mind he touched took something from him. Energy, consciousness, the very essence of what made him human. The townspeople watched in amazement as the stampede that should have destroyed their community came to a gradual stop in the middle of Main Street. 2,000 wild horses milled around, no longer running but still nervous and unpredictable. Marcus stood among them like a shepherd among his flock, his arms outstretched and his face twisted with concentration and pain. For 10 minutes, Marcus held the herd in check while the people of Cedar Gulch evacuated the streets and found secure shelter. The horses remained calm under his influence, but he could feel the spiritual price of the intervention building like pressure in his skull. Every second of control was costing him something precious: memories, emotions, pieces of his humanity that he would never recover. When the last person had reached safety, Marcus began the delicate process of directing the herd away from town and toward the open range where they could disperse naturally. One by one, he released his mental hold on individual animals, allowing them to return to their normal state while guiding them toward routes that would take them away from human settlements. As the last horse disappeared over the horizon, Marcus collapsed to his knees in the dust of Main Street. The spiritual price of saving Cedar Gulch had been extracted with compound interest. His vision blurred, his hands shook uncontrollably, and his memory felt Swiss-cheesed, with important pieces of his past simply gone. The townspeople emerged from their hiding places to find Marcus still kneeling in the street, blood trickling from his nose and his eyes vacant as a corpse's. Sheriff Williams was the first to reach him, followed by Doc Patterson and several other men who'd witnessed the impossible scene. "Marcus, can you hear me?" the sheriff asked, but Marcus didn't respond. He was staring at something only he could see, his lips moving in a whispered conversation with invisible companions. Doc Patterson examined Marcus carefully, finding no obvious injuries but noting the signs of severe psychological trauma. "It's like he's had a stroke," the doctor murmured. "But there's no physical cause I can identify. It's as if something has been torn out of his mind." They carried Marcus to the doctor's office, where he remained in a state of semi-consciousness for 3 days. During that time, he spoke constantly in a mixture of English and what sounded like animal vocalizations, as if he were carrying on conversations with creatures that existed only in his damaged mind. When Marcus finally returned to full awareness, he was a fundamentally different person. The easy confidence he'd once possessed was gone, replaced by a haunted wariness that made people uncomfortable. He remembered his name and his basic history, but large portions of his past had been erased as payment for saving the town. Most tragically, he had completely forgotten Ellen Crawford and the love they'd shared, though he sometimes woke from dreams with tears on his face and no memory of what had made him cry. The people of Cedar Gulch treated Marcus as a hero, but their gratitude was mixed with fear and superstitious awe. They'd seen him do something that defied natural law, and while they were grateful to be alive, they weren't sure what to make of a man who could speak to animals on such a fundamental level. Children were warned not to get too close to him, and adults spoke in whispers when he passed by. Marcus himself seemed largely unaware of how others perceived him. The massive use of his gift had left him partially trapped between the human and animal worlds, able to communicate more easily with horses than with people. He would often be found standing in fields or corrals, apparently having complex conversations with animals that responded to him as if he were one of their own kind. The final chapter of Marcus Thornfield's story began in the autumn of 1882, when a series of events revealed the true scope of what his gift had cost him and those around him. A traveling medicine show arrived in Cedar Gulch, featuring a woman who claimed to be able to communicate with the spirits of the dead. Most of the townspeople dismissed her as a fraud, but Marcus was drawn to her tent by something he couldn't name. The woman, who called herself Madame Zelda, took one look at Marcus and began to weep. "You carry so many voices," she whispered. "Human voices that were silenced to pay for your gift. They're trapped inside you, unable to find peace because they were taken before their time." Marcus didn't understand what she meant until Madame Zelda began calling out names. People from his past who had died or suffered misfortune as the spiritual price of his interventions with horses. Ellen Crawford was among them, but so were dozens of others he'd forgotten or never realized were connected to his gift. "Every time you saved an animal or prevented disaster," Madame Zelda explained, the spirits took a life or a piece of a life from somewhere else to maintain balance. The old Apache who gave you this power knew what would happen, but he was desperate to ensure that his grandson's horse wouldn't die in vain. The revelation shattered what remained of Marcus's fragile mental state. He finally understood that his gift hadn't just extracted a prize from him personally. It had been randomly harvesting life and happiness from innocent people throughout his years of using it. Ellen's death, his father's business failures, accidents, and illnesses affecting strangers he'd never met, all of it had been connected to his interventions with horses. Marcus left Cedar Gulch that same night, taking nothing but his horse and the clothes on his back. He rode into the wilderness with the intention of never using his gift again, hoping that distance and isolation would prevent further harm to innocent people. But the horses followed him, drawn by the connection that he could never fully break. For the remaining years of his life, Marcus lived as a hermit in the remote mountains of Colorado, caring for wild horses that sought him out, but refusing to use his gift to help humans or domestic animals. The spiritual voices that Madame Zelda had identified gradually faded as he stopped adding to their number, but the memory of all the lives his power had consumed haunted him until his death in 1891. Marcus Thornfield was found dead in his mountain cabin by a group of hunters, his body surrounded by more than 50 wild horses that had apparently come to pay their respects. The animals remained with his corpse for 3 days before finally dispersing, and local ranchers reported that the wild herds in the area seemed different afterward, less aggressive toward humans, as if some form of communication had been permanently severed. The true story of Marcus Thornfield's gift and its terrible price was never fully understood by the people of Cedar Gulch. They remembered him as the man who had saved their town from destruction, but they never learned about the cost in human lives that his power had demanded. His grave in the Cedar Gulch Cemetery bears a simple inscription. He spoke for those who could not speak for themselves. But perhaps the most fitting memorial to Marcus Thornfield is found in the behavior of horses throughout Colorado territory. Even decades after his death, ranchers and travelers report that wild horses in certain areas seem to possess an unusual understanding of human need and danger. They warn travelers of impending storms, guide lost riders to safety, and show a level of intelligence and compassion that defies conventional understanding of animal behavior. Some say these horses are still carrying out Marcus's work, protecting humans without requiring the terrible spiritual price that his gift had demanded. Others believe they're simply demonstrating the lasting impact of a man who understood that true power always comes with responsibility, and that the greatest gifts often require the greatest sacrifices. The horse whisperer who could stop Stampedes had indeed possessed an extraordinary gift, but he learned too late that some abilities are too dangerous to use, no matter how much good they might accomplish. His story serves as a reminder that power without wisdom is a curse, and that the price of miraculous intervention is often paid by those who can least afford it. In the end, Marcus Thornfield's greatest achievement wasn't stopping a stampede or taming wild horses. It was recognizing when his gift had become too dangerous to use and making the choice to protect others by sacrificing his own ability to help them. Sometimes the most heroic act is knowing when to stop being a hero. If you enjoyed this tale of supernatural gifts and their terrible costs, subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories from the American frontier. In the comments below, let us know what you think about Marcus's choice. Was he right to use his gift to save the town, knowing the price others would pay? Click on the video appearing on your screen now to discover another shocking story of power and sacrifice from the Old West.